When it comes to Disney Plus, we have gotten I would say, eclectic sort of bag of goodies that come from Disney Plus. We get Loki Season 2, which I think is a work of art. Fantastic approach, cinematography on point. We have things when it comes to Star Wars, The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian's amazing. It's a great show. We got, Book of Boba Fett, which was a little off, but, alright. We got things, back to Marvel. We have, WandaVision, which is an absolute work of art, almost the closest thing to a masterpiece that you can get it to, We have also Moon Knight. Moon Knight was, for me, a great show. I'm not going to say it, fully convinced me of all the powers that Moon Knight would have. But I do have to say that Moon Knight is a great example of something that was completely off, something that nobody was really aware of. A lot of people who heard of Moon Knight said, what is this? It's not a mainline story that, was kind of a gamble on Marvel's part. Maybe we'll throw this in there and let's see what goes, and if it works, it doesn't, but nonetheless, we got a pretty cool show out of, Moon Knight. There are a few things that were left unexplained, but nonetheless, we got a pretty darn good show out of it. Now, because we have this sort of grab bag of content coming from Disney Plus, it's difficult sometimes to determine whether or not a project is good. And it's so many different projects that's happening at the same time that it's hard to keep up. So let's talk about what I came here to talk about today, and that is The Acolyte. So before I continue, I think it's important to say that because the series is already in its entirety already on Disney Plus, and you can go and watch it if you'd like, I will be covering and saying things that could be a bit spoilery in this thoughts video. So if you do want to avoid some spoilers, make sure to go watch The Acolyte, then come back, and then we'll have this discussion with each other. But if you've already watched The Acolyte, please stick around, because I do want to get into the conversation of what I think of this show. So, what do I think of it as a whole, as an entire package? I want to first to start off by saying I love Star Wars. I absolutely love Star Wars. I love everything that has to do with Star Wars. Star Wars is an absolute joy to, see people dress up as Star Wars characters. Heck, I dressed up as my own creative version of a Mandalorian-style character for MegaCon. And here's a photo, so you can see. Yeah, I created pretty much this look, including the helmet. I 3D printed the helmet. It took me days. It took me, a lot of moments that I thought were a bit frustrating. It took me a lot of energy to make this, costume for me to wear and, meet up with people at a convention to talk about and just, fist bump people to see this, and it's a lot of hard work. So for me, I love Star Wars, so I'm not going to hide that from anybody. But just because a project is Star Wars doesn't mean it's always going to be and hit the mark. And that is something that my dad said, and I let that, kind of sink in. I let that information kind of, take its course in me. I saw the finale and I said, I'm going to just let it sit with this idea. And it's true. Just because something is Star Wars doesn't mean it's always going to be good. And I feel like that's kind of what happened with the Acolyte. Like the Acolyte, when it was presented and how it was, shown to the public, I think it was interesting. I think that in part, we didn't get, a trailer for the Acolyte, super, a long ways away from the actual project. People who went to D23, I believe, last year, got the, entire Star Wars treatment and saw that. But I think it was at Star Wars Celebration last year that people actually saw the official trailer for it. And, everybody was pumped, everybody was talking about it, everybody, was intrigued by the idea. But after watching the show, and I want to admit, I was excited for the show because I wanted to see the Acolyte as something that came from a different perspective. But the story, unfortunately, did not land. The story did not land. And I think that in part, it's the fault of the writing of the show, and also in part, it's the structure in how the story entirely was structured. I think that when you have the star power in the show, Lee Jung-jae and, coming from Squid Game, having this guy ultimately learn English for 4 months. Lee Jung-jae literally went 4 months to learning a whole other language in order to play this role. And I think he played it really well. And on top of that, you have Carrie-Anne Moss on this show as well, who I think is phenomenal. She's a phenomenal actress. And they ultimately just killed her off. Like, sure, you see her in little flashbacks, but that's about it. You have someone with the star power as Carrie-Anne Moss and Lee Jung-jae in your project, and you, in certain cases, underutilize that star power. And it's so funny because they could have done this entire story a whole lot better. I feel like they should have doubled down in the beginning of the show. Instead of saying, oh, it's the twin, or mention that she's a twin of any kind, leave that information to the very end. Make people speculate. Make people think, holy cow, what could it be? Like, could it be her? Could she be, having her mind controlled? Restructure the story, and don't think for a second that you're gonna just make a story about twin sisters and think that ultimately you have the Star Wars equivalent of Frozen. I think that's what they were trying to go for, in a weird way. It's the Star Wars equivalent of Frozen, except Frozen is a much better story than this. So it's really difficult. Like, I don't want to criticize the Acolyte. I don't. But I feel almost obligated. To do this because I feel like if I don't say anything, there won't be any change. If fans like you guys, don't talk about it or don't spread it, around and say, listen, Disney, you gotta, step up the story, And, when I stop to think about it, I see a bunch of people saying positive things about this show, and I think that's great. Honestly, I feel like after hearing people out on this particular season, I feel like they can make a better season 2 than season 1. I genuinely feel that. I feel like they could set up something cooler in a season 2 than in a season 1. But don't bank on it. Don't do that. I feel like a lot of people are banking on the idea that like, oh, I'm just gonna make a show that just sets up the next season. Don't do that. Make a great season 1 as though there was no season 2 to come by. And make people want to watch your second season. It's as simple as that. Don't set yourself up for a second season knowing that maybe you're probably not going to get a second season. I don't know about The Acolyte. Maybe The Acolyte gets a second season. But don't bank on it. Don't make your show entirely a setup for the second season. The only show that can get away with that is Andor. Because Andor is a prequel to a movie that we already know what happens. We already know what happens. If you've watched Rogue One, you already know what happens at the very end. And we know that the very end of Andor is going to be the tying end point to Rogue One. So you're going to finish watching Andor and you're going to be able to watch Rogue One and know exactly where you left off. You're going to have backstory. You're going to have explanation about things that have been happening. Like, holy cow. Why couldn't they just make a good first season? Heck, here's a great example. Squid Game. Yeah, Lee Jung-jae. Exactly. This one dude who studied 4 months for English did an entire show not in English that was going to be a one-off, literally. The Squid Game was literally written for one limited series. That's it. Done. Goodbye. Guess what? It was so popular and so many people asked for a second season that the writer listened to people and said, let's do it. So much so that now there's even a reality version of Squid Game that, funny enough, a friend of mine from high school was in that show. So, where am I getting at with The Acolyte? I think Disney should have done something that was more memorable. You know, give me a memorable soundtrack. Make me listen to the soundtrack of this show and make me emotional. Make me care for these characters. In order for me to care about these characters, all you have to do is just write a really good story. That's it. The problem is that at the very end, when everybody's emotional and crying and shocked at certain aspects, the emotion wasn't there. And that's the problem. The emotion wasn't there. Star Wars, when you think of Binary Sunset, when you think of that song, you remember in the back of your brain that it's Luke Skywalker looking out into the dual suns of Tatooine, thinking about, I'm about to go on like the ultimate adventure. Okay? I didn't get that from The Acolyte. And we should have, except make it to the dark side. Now, I get it. Maybe in part, okay, fine. They swapped places, like we saw. Okay, somebody mentioned it. As a matter of fact, that was one of the ideas that was thrown around. Oh, they're gonna switch places. They're gonna be, one is gonna go into the light side and the other one is gonna go to the dark side. They did it. That's what it was. But to say that I felt something about it, I didn't. That's the thing. Like, I want to feel. I want to watch a Star Wars movie and I want to cry. I want to be emotional. I want to be connected to this character. Dude. Okay, spoiler alert here. If you haven't watched The Force Awakens, here's a quick spoiler for you. If you want to skip ahead maybe a few seconds, there's your warning. But, dude, when Han Solo died in Force Awakens, I swear to God, I was in that theater on opening day. I freaking screamed out, "No!" I swear, that's what I did. Like, I was so upset because I felt for that character. I built a connection with that character. This time around, no connection there. May and heck, see, these characters, who I wish were a little bit more memorable, would be nice to just have that, you know? You have May and Osha, who are two characters who, you know, you're supposed to care about because they have this really interesting backstory. We see that they're, you know, the product of, you know, the Immaculate Conception kind of thing that we see with Anakin Skywalker. And to me, it's kind of iffy, you know? I get it. You know, you're gonna say like, oh, Darth Plagueis did all this. And I know that they teased him at the very end. I remember seeing like him like in that cave, that creepy cave, and I was like, that's probably Darth Plagueis. Because I know that they want to set that up, you know? And then you see the back of Yoda's head. And then you're like, okay. Wow. I think Disney could have done better. I think they could have done way better with this story. So I'm not going to blame entirely Disney on this one. Because I feel like this project was approved during the Chapek era. So, as a reminder, Bob Chapek wanted to like push out as much content as possible. So they probably pushed this entire story together. And we thought, all right, cool, another Star Wars story. And I'm keeping my hopes up, you know, for what's coming next, which is Skeleton Crew. If you don't know about Skeleton Crew, it's like a group of kids with Jude Law in the story, and they're kind of going out in the galaxy and solving things here and there. My hopes are up for that story. I hope it doesn't run into the same problems that the Acolyte ran into, even though that was also a Chapek approved story. But as of recently, I think the most recent thing that I watched from Star Wars that I really liked was Ahsoka. I think Ahsoka was really good. You know, if you guys want to go back and watch my, you know, explanation as to what happens with Ahsoka, you can go back and watch that video. But that's what it is, you know? I hope that Disney understands, you know, what's going on, understands that this wasn't a big win on their part, and I hope that they can bring something new to the table that really like hammers home and gets people excited for Star Wars, because ultimately, you know, people aren't super pumped about it. Listen, I want Star Wars to have their MCU moment. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want people to get excited for Star Wars as much as people get excited for the MCU. That's what I want. And I hope that in the future, they are capable of pushing things out that are just a tad bit better. Now, again, this is all my opinion on the subject. You know, I'm not here to hate on Star Wars. I love Star Wars. As a matter of fact, there are many great things that happened in this series as well that I enjoy. There's a lot of lightsaber battles. There's a lot of, you know, great moments here and there. You know, I things that I was like, oh my god, like this series could have more of this, you know, and it didn't have that much of it, you know. I don't want there to be like filler episodes and that sort of crazy nonsense, you know. I want Star Wars to be Star Wars, you know. Ahsoka to me was Star Wars. That was Star Wars. It felt small. Ahsoka feels large and expansive, and you feel like there's a reason for everything that's happening there. The Acolyte, not so much. And I hope that you either think the same or think differently than me. And if that's the case, if you think differently than I do, or if you think the same as I do, go down in the comments below. I want to hear your suggestions, your ideas as to what you think of the Acolyte and what could have been done to make it better. And I want to get that discussion with you. I love having conversations with you guys down below that are about these movies, these shows, these game worlds and different things that I really enjoy talking about. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified when new videos go live on this channel. And thank you so much for watching this video. And I'll see you in the next video.
Scrolling through YouTube, same old routine, then bam, movie savant, what a scene. Trivia bombshells dropping knowledge like rain. Forget the dishes, gotta watch it again. Movie buffs unite, savants to place. Subscribe and hit the bell, don't leave a trace. Next level knowledge keeps you in the loop. Savants got the scoop, ain't nothing to recoup.